Today's story may change the way you see life. So subscribe now and leave a like so you don't miss any stories like this one. Now, take a deep breath and let's begin.
The pen fell onto the marble floor with a metallic sound that echoed through the empty room. David Lancaster looked at the signed document on the mahogany desk and felt his stomach churn. He had just authorized the death of his own son. 3 days. That was the deadline Dr. Harrison had given. 72 hours before the heart of that baby, only 6 months old, stopped beating. David turned the electric wheelchair toward the panoramic window that overlooked the city. Down below, thousands of people went on with their normal lives, unaware of the private hell he was living on the 43rd floor of that skyscraper. Billionaire. Powerful. Feared in the business world. And completely powerless in the face of a medical diagnosis. The baby had the same degenerative disease that had confined David to that chair at 23. The same genetic curse. The same sentence. But while David had survived decades with expensive treatments and constant suffering, little Samuel would not be so lucky. His body too fragile, his organs compromised since birth. 3 days was all that medicine could offer. At least that was what Dr. Harrison had guaranteed. The office door opened without ceremony. David didn't even need to turn to know who it was. Only one person in that house had the courage to enter without knocking. Isabella was 17, dark skin that shone under the artificial light of the office, and eyes that always seemed to see beyond appearances. The housekeeper's daughter, she had grown up in that mansion since childhood, moving through the corridors as if they were her own. David had always tolerated her out of respect for her mother, who had worked for the family for 20 years. But tolerance had limits. Did you sign it? Her voice came out low, controlled, but loaded with something David couldn't identify. Defiance? Disappointment? It's none of your business. He didn't turn around. Samuel is my business. Isabella took 2 steps forward. I've taken care of him since he was born. I change his diapers, bathe him, rock him when he cries. So yes, it's my business. David finally turned the chair to face her. The girl wore a white apron over her simple clothes, her hair tied up in a high bun. There were milk stains on her sleeve. She had probably just finished feeding the baby. You take care of him because you're paid to do so, David said, his voice sharp as glass. Don't confuse professional obligation with the right to give opinions about family decisions. Family decisions? Isabella crossed her arms. You barely go into his room. You don't hold him. You don't look into his eyes. How can you make a decision about someone you don't even know? The silence that followed was dense, dangerous. David Lancaster was not a man who accepted insults. He had built an empire by crushing people who dared to question him. But something in that girl's posture, her straight spine, raised chin, steady eyes, stopped him from exploding. You don't understand, he said at last, his voice lower. You don't know what it's like to live trapped in a body that betrays you every day. The pain. The humiliation. The dependence. I won't allow my son to go through that. So you'd rather he not live anything at all? Isabella took another step. You'd rather take away any chance from him, no matter how small, because you're afraid? Afraid. David laughed, a bitter sound. This isn't fear. It's mercy. Mercy would be fighting for him, looking for other doctors, trying experimental treatments. You have money for that. Isabella's voice trembled slightly. But giving up before even trying? That's not mercy. That's cowardice. The word hung in the air like an accusation. David felt the anger rise in his throat, hot and familiar. Who did that girl think she was? A 17-year-old maid, with no formal education, no medical knowledge, daring to call him a coward? Get out of my office. Each word came out slow, dangerous. Isabella didn't move. I saw him smiling today. David blinked. What? Samuel. He smiled when I sang to him. He moved his little fingers trying to reach my face. He cried when I left the room, as if he knew I had gone away. Her eyes shone. Babies beyond hope don't do that, Mr. Lancaster. Babies on the verge of death don't react like that. Dr. Harrison explained. They're just reflexes. Automatic responses from the nervous system. I don't believe that. Isabella shook her head. And deep down, neither do you. David opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. Because she was right. In the rare moments when he allowed himself to look at his son through the bedroom security cameras, he had seen the same signs. The baby seemed too active, too present, too alive for someone with only 3 days left to live. But that was exactly what made everything crueler. Hope was poison. Better to cut the suffering at the root. 3 days, David said, turning the chair back toward the window. In 3 days, the nurses will come to get him. They'll take him to a clinic where he won't feel pain. Where everything will be peaceful. It's my final decision. He expected to hear the door slam, angry footsteps retreating down the hallway. But Isabella remained there, standing, silent. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded different. It was no longer defiance. It was a promise. Then I have 3 days to prove you're wrong. This time, she left before David could answer. And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt something he no longer knew how to name. Something disturbing and uncomfortable. Something like doubt. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave in the comments what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. Isabella closed Samuel's bedroom door carefully, as if the simple sound could hurt the baby sleeping in the mahogany crib. The moon-shaped lamp projected soft shadows on the walls decorated with drawings of forest animals. Everything in that room screamed luxury and care. Everything, except for the emotional abandonment that hung in the air like invisible fog. She approached the crib and watched little Samuel. 6 months of life, chubby cheeks, long eyelashes that trembled while he dreamed. His breathing rose and fell in the calm rhythm of someone at peace. He didn't look like a baby on the verge of death. He didn't look fragile or broken. Isabella reached out and lightly touched the baby's palm. Immediately, his tiny fingers closed around her index finger. A firm, instinctive grip, full of life. Tears burned her eyes. "You're not going to die," she whispered. "I won't let you." The bedroom door opened again. Isabella didn't need to look to recognize the heavy, dragging footsteps. Her mother, Carmen, entered carrying a tray with sterilized bottles and medications. Her face looked tired, marked by wrinkles that seemed to have deepened over the last few months. "You confronted Mr. Lancaster again?" Carmen set the tray on the dresser and crossed her arms. She wasn't angry. She was worried. "Someone needs to do it." "Isabella, my daughter," Carmen sighed, stepping closer. "I understand what you feel. God knows I've grown attached to this boy too. But it's not our decision. He's not our child. And that makes us accomplices." Isabella turned to face her. "Are we just going to watch while they take him away? While they turn off his life like he's an electronic device?" Carmen closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, there was pain there. The pain of someone carrying secrets that were too heavy. "You don't know the whole story," she said softly. "Then tell me." Carmen looked at Samuel, then at the closed door, as if checking that no one else could hear them. When she spoke, her voice was so low that Isabella had to lean in to listen. "I was working here when Mr. Lancaster had the accident. He was 23. Handsome, full of life, about to take over his father's business. Then came the paragliding fall." Carmen shook her head. "I saw him go from a vibrant man to someone completely destroyed. Not just his body. His soul." "I know that," Isabella said. "But you weren't here in the first few weeks. You didn't see the crying fits in the middle of the night. You didn't see when he tried." Carmen stopped, swallowing hard. "When he tried to end everything. 3 times, Isabella. 3 times we had to stop him." Silence fell heavily between them. Isabella felt her stomach tighten. It took years for him to accept the wheelchair. To accept that he would never walk again. And even now, after all this time, do you think he's accepted it? Carmen pointed toward the door. He turned into that cold, distant man because it's the only way he found to survive. And now, seeing his son with the same disease. "But Samuel doesn't have the same disease," Isabella interrupted. "I know he doesn't." Carmen frowned. "Dr. Harrison diagnosed." "Dr. Harrison is lying." The words came out before Isabella could stop them. Carmen's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Isabella, You can't say something like that. Dr. Harrison is internationally renowned. He's the one who has taken care of Mr. Lancaster all these years. Exactly. Isabella picked up one of the medication bottles from the tray. The clear liquid sloshed inside the glass. He knows Mr. Lancaster better than anyone. He knows exactly how to manipulate him. Manipulate. Carmum looked horrified. Why would a doctor do that? I don't know. Not yet. But look at Samuel. Really look. Isabella pointed to the crib. Have you ever seen a hopeless baby with this level of response? With this strength? With this will to live? Carmum stepped closer to the crib, watching the child she had cared for since the first day. Samuel chose that moment to open his big dark eyes, focusing on Carmum's face with impressive clarity. His lips curved into a toothless smile. See? Isabella insisted. That's not a reflex. That's awareness. That's life. Carmum reached out her hand, and Samuel grabbed her finger with the same strength he had used with Isabella. The older woman's expression began to change, doubt seeping in like water through cracks. Even if you're right, she said slowly, what can we do? We're maids. We don't have the power to challenge a medical diagnosis. We can't just. I'm going to find out the truth. Isabella picked up the medication bottle again, holding it up against the light. Starting with this right here. Isabella, don't do anything reckless. If Mr. Lancaster finds out you're investigating, he fires me. So what? Isabella faced her mother. I'd rather lose a job than lose an innocent baby. Especially when I know deep in my soul that something is very wrong here. Carmum opened her mouth to argue, but she was interrupted by a sound from the baby monitor. Footsteps. Someone approaching down the hallway. The two women looked at each other quickly. Isabella hid the medication bottle in her apron pocket. The door opened. David Lancaster entered with a motorized chair, his face a mask of neutral expression. But Isabella noticed something different in his eyes. A hesitation. A crack in the armor. I want to see my son, he said, his voice hoarse. Carmum and Isabella stepped away from the crib. David approached slowly, as if forcing himself to do something painful. When he finally looked at Samuel, the baby was already awake, his eyes fixed on his father. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Samuel stretched out his little hands toward David. The billionaire froze. Isabella saw the struggle happening on his face. The urge to reach out. The fear of connecting. The pain of facing his own reflection in that small being who might carry the same curse. But David didn't touch his son. Instead, he backed the chair away. Make sure he receives the medications at the correct times, he said dryly, turning to leave. All the medications. No exceptions. The door closed behind him with a final click. Isabella looked at the bottle hidden in her pocket. Then she looked at Samuel, who was now crying softly, his little hand still stretched toward the place where his father had been. And it was at that moment that she made the riskiest decision of her life. Dawn found Isabella sitting on the bathroom floor of Samuel's room, a flashlight between her teeth and the medication bottle in her hands. Beside her, her phone displayed the results of frantic searches she had been making over the last 2 hours. What she had discovered made her blood run cold. The medication prescribed by Dr. Harrison was not to treat the supposed degenerative disease. It was a powerful sedative, used in asylums to keep terminal patients in a vegetative state until death. The dosage was far too high for a baby. Far too high for any child. Isabella capped the bottle with trembling hands. Samuel wasn't dying from any disease. He was being slowly poisoned. She left the bathroom and looked at the crib. Samuel slept deeply, his breathing slower than normal. The effects of the medicine he had received hours earlier were still circulating through his little body. How long had that been happening? Since birth? Since the diagnosis? Anger burned in Isabella's chest like living fire. But anger wasn't enough. She needed proof. She needed a plan. She took the empty bottle that was in the bathroom trash and replaced it with the full one she had taken from Carmum's tray. Then she poured the original medication down the sink drain, filling the bottle with filtered water mixed with a bit of saline solution to give it the right appearance. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. The next 2 days would be crucial. If it really was the medication keeping Samuel in a lethargic state, stopping it should show improvements. But she would need to be cautious. Any sudden change would draw attention. Isabella spent the night researching physical therapy exercises for babies. Massages that stimulated circulation. Gentle movements that strengthened muscles. Anything that could reverse months of forced sedation without raising suspicion. When the sun rose, she already had a complete plan. "Good morning, little one," she whispered, picking Samuel up for the first bottle of the day. The baby opened his eyes slowly, still drowsy from the chemical residue in his blood. But there was something different in his gaze. A spark Isabella hadn't seen in days. She began the normal routine. Bath, diaper change, feeding. But between each task, she added the exercises. She gently flexed his little legs, massaged his arms, stimulated his reflexes with colorful toys. Carmum showed up around 9 in the morning, bringing clean clothes. "You didn't sleep?" Her mother frowned when she saw Isabella's dark circles. "I slept a little." A lie. "I was just researching care techniques for special babies." Carmum watched her daughter suspiciously but said nothing. She only left the clothes and walked out, not before casting one last worried glance. The next few hours were tense. Isabella kept Samuel away from the bedroom security cameras whenever she did the exercises. She knew David rarely checked the recordings, but she couldn't risk it. She made up excuses to cover the crib with a light cloth during naps, creating a dark environment that justified the lack of visibility. At lunchtime, the first sign came. Samuel didn't want to sleep after feeding. Normally, the medication would leave him unconscious for hours. But today he stayed awake, curious eyes following Isabella around the room. When she came closer, the baby moved his little arms with more coordination than before. "That's right," Isabella encouraged, her heart racing. "You're waking up." In the afternoon, the improvement became more evident. Samuel managed to hold a rattle for a few seconds. He turned his head when Isabella called his name. He even let out a little giggle when she made funny faces. Each small progress was a silent victory, and growing proof that Isabella was right. But the joy didn't last long. The bedroom door opened abruptly. David entered with a motorized chair, his face closed off. Behind him, imposing and dressed in an impeccable surgical suit, was Dr. Harrison. The doctor was tall, gray-haired, with cold eyes that seemed to calculate and measure everything around him. He carried a black leather briefcase and a stethoscope hanging around his neck. Isabella felt her stomach churn just looking at him. "I came to do the final evaluation," Dr. Harrison announced, his voice professional and distant. "To check if the palliative treatment is being administered correctly." Isabella instinctively held Samuel tighter against her chest. The baby was awake, alert, completely different from the vegetative state he should have been in after days of heavy medication. If the doctor noticed. "Put him in the crib," Dr. Harrison ordered, opening the briefcase and taking out medical instruments. "He just fed," Isabella improvised quickly. "He needs to burp or he'll have reflux." "Nurses do not dictate medical procedures." Dr. Harrison's voice hardened. "Put the baby in the crib. Now." David watched everything in silence, his face unreadable. Isabella had no choice. With her heart hammering against her ribs, she placed Samuel in the crib. The doctor stepped closer, picked up the stethoscope, and began examining the baby. Isabella saw the exact moment he realized something was wrong. His eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened. Samuel wasn't lethargic. He was reactive. Awake. Present. Dr. Harrison picked up the medication bottle from the tray beside the crib. He opened the cap. Smelled it. His expression turned icy. "This is not the medication I prescribed." The silence that followed was absolute. David turned the chair to face Isabella. "Explain," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I didn't give the medication because he isn't sick." The words came out firm, despite the fear. "You're being deceived, Mr. Lancaster. This man isn't treating your son. He's killing him." Dr. Harrison let out a short, humorless laugh. Serious accusations coming from a teenage maid with no medical training whatsoever. "Mr. Lancaster, I suggest you fire her immediately before she causes more damage." "Damage?" Isabella felt courage growing inside her. The only damage here is what you've been causing for months. Look at Samuel. Really look. He's awake. He's strong. He's truly alive for the first time since you started poisoning him. Enough. David slammed his hand on the arm of the chair. Isabella, you're fired. Get your things and leave my house immediately. No, Isabella positioned herself in front of the crib. I'm not leaving. I won't let you kill this child. Dr. Harrison was already grabbing his phone. I'm calling security. Call them. Isabella challenged. Call security, call the police, call whoever you want. But before that, do a blood test on Samuel. Right now. Here. See what's in his body. The suggestion hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Dr. Harrison froze with the phone in the air. David looked at the doctor, then at Isabella, then at his son kicking his little legs in the crib with a vitality impossible for someone beyond hope. And for the first time, Isabella saw doubt in the billionaire's eyes. The silence lasted only 3 seconds. But they felt like 3 hours. Dr. Harrison slowly put the phone away, his face a mask of professional control. I'm not going to waste my time with a hysterical maid's little show. Mr. Lancaster, you need to make a decision. Either she leaves, or I leave. And without my care, I guarantee the boy won't last 48 hours. David looked at the doctor. Then at Isabella. Then at Samuel, who at that moment decided to let out a sharp, joyful squeal, completely inappropriate for a baby supposedly on the verge of death. Do the test, David said. Dr. Harrison blinked. Excuse me. You heard me. Do the blood test. Here. Now. David's voice was firm, but Isabella noticed something different there. A crack in the blind trust he had always placed in the doctor. Mr. Lancaster, this is ridiculous. I don't have equipment for a complete laboratory analysis here in the mansion. I would need to send it to. You have a briefcase full of medical instruments right there. David pointed. Draw the blood. Then we'll go together to your private laboratory and run the analysis there. Personally. Dr. Harrison's face flushed slightly. Only slightly. But it was enough. Are you accusing me of something? The doctor crossed his arms. I'm asking you to prove that a 17-year-old girl is wrong. That should be easy for someone with your experience. David turned the chair, positioning himself between the doctor and the crib. Unless there's some reason you don't want to do this test. Isabella held her breath. She was watching the shift happen in real time. Doubt seeping in. The truth beginning to surface. Dr. Harrison let out a long, theatrical sigh. Very well. If this will satisfy your paranoias fueled by an uneducated maid, I'll do the test. But when the results confirm my diagnosis, I want this girl not only fired, but sued for medical negligence. He opened the briefcase and took out a syringe. He approached the crib with deliberately calm movements. Isabella noticed that his hands were trembling slightly. The doctor grabbed Samuel's little arm to draw the blood. The baby struggled, crying. And that was when it happened. Samuel kicked. It wasn't a reflex movement. It was an intentional, coordinated kick, strong enough to make Dr. Harrison release his arm and take a step back. The baby kept thrashing, his little legs kicking the air with a strength no terminal child should have. David stood up from the chair. No. Wait. David couldn't stand. He was paraplegic. But Isabella saw the instinctive movement happen, his body leaning forward, his arms stretching out, every paternal instinct screaming to protect his son. Only the chair prevented him from actually standing. But it was enough to change everything. He's strong, David murmured, more to himself than to the others. Too strong. Dr. Harrison drew the blood quickly, his hands now visibly nervous. He stored the sample in a tube and snapped the briefcase shut with a metallic click. 20 minutes to my lab, he said, already heading for the door. You can come with me if you want. I will. David turned the chair. Isabella, stay with Samuel. If anything happens. Nothing will happen, she interrupted, picking the baby up. Samuel immediately calmed down, nestling his little head against her shoulder. He's going to be fine. For the first time in months, he's really going to be fine. David watched the scene for a long moment. Then he nodded and followed the doctor out. The trip to Dr. Harrison's private laboratory was silent. David followed the doctor's car with his own driver, his mind swirling with possibilities he had spent months trying to suppress. What if Isabella was right? What if he had been poisoning his own son for months, blindly trusting a man who? What reason would he have to do that? The answer came like lightning. Money. David's will left the entire fortune to Samuel. But if Samuel died before turning one, due to an early inheritance clause in case of proven genetic incapacity, the money would be divided among charitable institutions. Institutions that Dr. Harrison presided over. $30 billion. David felt nauseous. The laboratory was modern, full of gleaming equipment. Dr. Harrison prepared the blood sample with professional efficiency, but David noticed the sweat forming on the doctor's forehead. The hands that had once been steady were now visibly shaking. The analysis machine beeped. Results on the screen. Dr. Harrison went pale. Well? David demanded. The doctor didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, eyes wide. David turned the chair until he could see the results. He didn't have enough medical training to understand all the numbers, but one line stood out in bright red. Barbiturate sedative, 847 milligrams per deciliter. Toxic level. 847, David read aloud, his voice starting to tremble. Explain that. The palliative medication contains. Lie. David slammed the table, making instruments jump. That level isn't palliative. That's poisoning. You were killing my son. Dr. Harrison stepped back, hands raised. Mr. Lancaster, you need to understand, his illness is terminal anyway. I was only. What illness? David advanced with the chair, cornering the doctor against the wall. Show me the tests. Show me the evidence of this degenerative disease you diagnosed. The doctor opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. There were no tests. There never had been. The truth crashed over David like an avalanche. 6 months. 6 months of pure terror, of anticipatory grief, of preparing to bury his own son. All based on the word of a man he had blindly trusted. A man who was trying to kill his baby for money. The rage that exploded inside David was something primitive, visceral. He grabbed the doctor's lab coat hard enough to tear the fabric. I'm going to destroy you, David whispered, each word dripping with venom. I'm going to sue you for attempted murder. I'm going to expose you to every medical board in the country. When I'm done, you won't even be able to prescribe aspirin. Dr. Harrison tried to pull away, but David was stronger than he looked. Years of physical therapy for his arms. Years of accumulated rage. And my son. David pulled the doctor closer. How long until the sedative leaves his system completely? Maybe 3 days, the doctor stammered. But without permanent damage, he's young, his body will. David released him in disgust. He grabbed his phone and called his lawyer. I want an arrest warrant for attempted murder. And I want it now. While David made the call, Dr. Harrison tried to escape through the side door. But David's driver, a former soldier, was already blocking the exit. There was no escape. The police arrived in 12 minutes. They took Dr. Harrison away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence, still claiming misunderstandings. David remained alone in the empty laboratory, staring at the screen with the test results. 847 milligrams. His son had survived 847 milligrams of poison running through his veins. And David had almost let them kill him. David returned to the mansion when the sun was already setting. The golden afternoon lights bathed the empty corridors, creating long shadows that seemed different now. Everything felt different. As if the entire house had changed simply because the truth had finally come to light. He found Isabella in Samuel's bedroom, sitting in the rocking chair with a baby in her arms. She was humming softly a song David didn't recognize, probably something her mother used to sing. Samuel was awake, his little eyes fixed on the girl's face, one of his tiny hands gripping her finger. Isabella noticed David's presence and stopped singing. She looked at him with a mixture of caution and defiance, as if she still expected to be fired or worse. Dr. Harrison has been arrested, David said, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. Attempted murder. Medical fraud. He's going to spend decades in prison. Isabella nodded slowly, without letting go of Samuel. And the baby? The tests showed toxic levels of sedative, but no degenerative disease. No genetic disorder. David had to pause, emotion threatening to break his voice. My son is healthy. He always was. And I. The words died in his throat. How could he summarize the enormity of what he had almost done? How could he express the horror of knowing he had signed the death sentence of an innocent child? You were deceived, Isabella said gently. Manipulated by someone you trusted. That doesn't absolve me. David turned the chair until he was closer. I should have looked at my son. I should have held him, spent time with him, realized something was wrong. But I was too busy feeling sorry for myself. Samuel chose that moment to look toward his father. His big, curious eyes studied David's face as if seeing it for the first time. And maybe they were. Maybe it was the first time the baby could truly see, without the chemical fog clouding his awareness. You saved my son, David said, looking at Isabella. A 17-year-old girl saw the truth that a billionaire couldn't see. Challenged a renowned doctor when everyone else would have just followed orders. Risked your job, your safety, everything, for a child who wasn't even yours. Tears shone in Isabella's eyes. I couldn't let him die. Not when I knew something was wrong. Courage isn't the absence of fear, David said. It's doing the right thing despite the fear. You have more courage than I will ever have. He held out his hands. May I? Isabella understood immediately. She stood up and, with extreme care, placed Samuel in his father's arms. David held his son for the first time in 6 months. The small, warm weight against his chest, the soft breathing, the baby smell mixed with children's soap. Samuel watched him closely, then brought a tiny hand to his father's cheek, touching it with curiosity. Something broke inside David. All the walls he had built, all the coldness he had cultivated, all the distance he had kept. Everything collapsed like a sandcastle under a giant wave. He cried. He cried for the lost months. For the betrayed trust. For the son he almost lost. For every wrong choice driven by fear. Samuel didn't cry. He just stayed there, little eyes fixed on his father, as if he understood that something important was happening. I'm going to be better, David whispered against the baby's little head. I'm going to learn to be the father you deserve. It won't be perfect. I don't know how to do this. But I'll try. Every day I'll try. Isabella wiped her own tears, smiling. He'll teach you. Babies have that ability. David looked at her. I want you to keep taking care of him. Not as an employee. As part of the family. You and your mother. I'll pay for college, whatever you want to study. And when you're not studying, I want you here, helping raise this boy. Because without you... He didn't need to finish. They both knew how the story could have ended. Carmen appeared at the door, her eyes red from crying so much. Isabella ran to hug her mother. The two held each other for a long moment, relief and joy finally replacing months of fear and doubt. He's going to walk, Carmen said, looking at Samuel. I can see it in him. He'll run, jump, live fully. He will, David agreed, watching his son who was now trying to grab his own nose. And I'll be here to see every step. In the following weeks, the mansion changed. It stopped being a silent mausoleum of wealth and loneliness and became a noisy home full of life and possibilities. Samuel improved every day. First he sat without support. Then he crawled. At 9 months, he stood up holding onto the furniture. David changed too. He started therapy to process the trauma. Reconnected with parts of himself he thought were dead. Learned that disability wasn't a curse, and that his own physical limitations had never been the real problem. The problem had always been fear. On Samuel's first birthday, the mansion was full of people. Friends, family, employees. Isabella, now enrolled in medical school on a full scholarship paid by David, had decorated everything with balloons and colorful banners. The culminating moment came when they placed Samuel on the floor of the main hall. He looked around, processing all the people watching. Then he looked at his father, who was a few meters ahead in his wheelchair. And Samuel took his first step. Wobbly, uncertain, but determined. One step. Then another. Then one more. Everyone in the room held their breath. Samuel crossed the hall alone, little arms stretched out to keep his balance, until he finally fell into his father's arms. "Dada," the baby said clearly, grabbing David's face with both hands. David held him as if he were the most precious thing in the world. Because he was. "My son," he whispered. "My miracle." And in that moment, surrounded by people who genuinely loved his family, David understood something fundamental. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes or have superpowers. Sometimes they are brave 17-year-old girls who refuse to accept injustice. Sometimes they are resilient babies who fight to live against all odds. And sometimes, just sometimes, even broken men can learn to stand again. The lesson would echo forever. Courage knows no age, social class, or skin color. And true love demands that we see beyond our own fears to protect those who cannot protect themselves. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave in the comments what you thought and which city